Hi, I'm Minda Tracy from My Online Training Hub. I'll be taking you through how to use Excel's built-in tools to build this actual versus plan dashboard you see behind me. Before we get started, I just want to set your expectations for this tutorial. First, it's going to be at a fast pace. You won't have time to follow along step by step the first time you watch it, but there's a link in the video description where you can download the workbook and data. And of course, you can rewatch the video as many times as you like, pausing and rewinding as required. Now, I'm using Microsoft 365, but this dashboard can be built in all versions of Excel from 2010 onward. Now, some of the steps may appear advanced, but I promise you, none of it's difficult, and there's absolutely no programming involved. Okay, let's get started. I'll be using a modified version of some IT spend data from Obvians. You can see it's in the perfect tabular layout, which is suitable for pivot tables, and it's broken down by month, business area, location, IT area, cost elements, and then we have values for actual, forecast, and plan. Now there are over 81,000 rows of data representing 12 months for the plan and forecast. Now the actual values are currently only up to August, but on the future data sheet you can see we have data for September through to December, and I'll use that at the end to demonstrate how easy it is to update your dashboards when you use the techniques that I'm going to cover in this tutorial. Now the first important step is ensuring that the source data for all your analysis and charts is formatted in an Excel table. And we can do this with the keyboard shortcut Control-T. It's asking me if my table has headers, that's the column labels, and yes it does, so I'll click OK. You can see now that it's formatted in a table because it displays the default banded row formatting, and the column headers now have filter buttons. And if we look on the Table Design tab, you can see the table name is Table 1. I'm going to rename that Data and just press Enter. Now before we start the analysis, let's take a look at the dashboard so we can see what pivot tables we need. At the top of the dashboard, we have some headline figures that provide the overall view of actuals year to date and the full year forecast versus plan. Let's build the pivot tables for those figures. So back in the file, we'll insert a pivot table. We can do this from the Table Design tab and then summarize with pivot table. I'm going to put it onto a new worksheet, and I'll call this sheet analysis. Let me bring the field list into view and we'll make it a bit bigger. Now I recommend that you use one sheet per pivot table so that you never have errors caused by them overlapping one another. But for this tutorial, I'm going to put them all on one sheet just to save me time. So my headline figures are my actual, and then plan versus actual, and plan versus forecast. I'm going to start with a pivot table just for the actuals, and I need to calculate the variance to plan. And we can do that on the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and then Fields, Items, and Sets, and then I'm going to add calculated fields. So the first one is plan versus actual variance, and the formula is simply plan minus actual. Now I should point out that because the data is all cost related, an adverse variance will occur when the actual spend is higher than the planned spend, and that's why my formula is plan minus actual. Of course, if you were doing sales variance analysis, it would be the other way around. Alright, that's the one and only accounting lesson for this tutorial. So that's my first calculated field. I'm just going to click Add. I also want to calculate the percentage variance, so that's just plan divided by actual minus 1. So let's add that, and I'll click OK. They get added to the pivot table, you can see them behind. I'm going to move the values down into the row labels, and let's right click and format the numbers. So go into number format. I should point out that it's important you always format your pivot table numbers via this dialog box rather than using the number formatting on the home tab of the ribbon. This way the number formatting is attached to the field, so that when the pivot table grows, the number formatting is automatically applied to any new cells for that field. I've already created a custom format, and you can see it here at the bottom. It formats the numbers into millions and it puts any negative values in parentheses. So click OK. Let's repeat that for the plan versus actual. Just click end and then OK. And let's also format the percentage. Custom end. And there's one I've already set up for percentages. But click OK. Now I need a slicer for the period because remember I only have actuals up to August. So I'm going to right click, add as slicer. And then let's bring it over here. I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting. We'll give it 2 columns and I'll make it a bit smaller. So I'll select up to August in my slicer. And now my actuals are for August year to date. Let's give this pivot table a name. We'll just call it headline year to date. And I need another pivot table the same. So I'm just going to copy and paste it below. This one is my forecast and plan v forecast. So let's add some calculated fields, items and sets, calculated field. So this one is plan versus forecast variance. And the formula is plan minus forecast. Click add. I also want the percentage change. So we'll just modify this, -1, and click add and OK. Now, I don't want this pivot table linked to the slicer, so I'm going to right click the slicer, report connections. I'm going to deselect this new pivot table that I've just added. It's reminding me that I need to give it a name, so I'll click OK and let's give it a name before we format the values. So this one is headline full year. And now let's format the numbers. And OK. We need to repeat it for this field. And OK. And lastly, the percentage. And OK. All right, so there's the 2 pivot tables for our headline figures, and we can put them into the dashboard. So let's go to sheet 1. I've got a little bit of formatting here just to save some time, but I want to just make it clear that there aren't any special add-ins or sheets required for the dashboard itself. It's just a regular sheet. So with that said, I'm going to rename it dashboard. Now the dashboard has a blue background, so I'll set that up first under page layout, background. I've already created an image and we'll just go and grab that from my folder. There it is there. Insert. We'll turn off the grid lines. Now we've got a nice clean slate ready to populate with our dashboard. So all I need to do now is start linking the cells here to the pivot tables that contain the values. I've already formatted them, and that's why we see the number formats feeding through. So this is my plan versus actual variance. And if you remember, on the dashboard we've got a symbol to indicate the direction of the variance and the percentage, and it's color coded. So to do that, we're going to insert the symbols on the Insert tab on the far right symbol. Now under the font Arial and the subset geometric shapes, there's an up and down triangle. Just double click them to insert them. Now we've got them in the cell. I'm just going to write the formula that's going to determine whether we need the up or down triangle. So it's just an if formula that says if this value is less than 0, then it's a negative variance. So we want the up arrow to indicate it's over budget. Otherwise, we'll have the down arrow. Close my if, and then I want to concatenate that symbol to the value returned in the pivot table. So let's go and grab it. It's 10% variance. Now you'll see when I press enter that we get the value, but it's not formatted. So what we need to do is wrap it in the text function, and that allows us to specify the number format. So here, this is just a percentage variance. I want 0% for the positive, and if it's a negative, I'm going to put it in parentheses, or brackets as we say in the UK and Australia. And that reminds me of when I used to work in finance in London, and my cost centre managers would often ask me whether brackets meant the variance was good or bad, and I'd tell them to remember that brackets are bad news. Of course, parentheses doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Okay, I digress a little. We'll close the parentheses on the text formula and press enter, and now we get it formatted correctly. Now, we're not always there to remind our users that brackets are bad news. So another thing we can do is use conditional formatting to format the percentage red or green, obviously red for bad, green for good. So let's do that on the Home tab, Conditional Formatting, New Rule. We're going to use a formula, and all we need to do is say if this value here is less than 0, then we're going to format the font. Now, normally we do it red, but red on this blue-green background hurts your eyes. So we'll use a shade of orange, which is pretty close to red. Actually, that one I think is a little bright. Let's go one shade lighter. Okay and okay. Now, this is good news. It's under budget, so we need another rule for the green format. And again, we're using a formula. If this is greater than 0, then we're going to format the font in this bright green. Click OK and OK. And now we have our percentage variance conditionally formatted. All we need to do now is repeat for the full year forecast. So let's go and grab that and the variance and the percentage. Now for the percentage, I'm going to copy this because it's already got some of the work done for me. So I'm just going to replace this get pivot data formula with the correct reference. Press enter. Now I also need to modify the conditional formatting. So in Manage Rules, I'm going to double click, and instead of checking the values in column M, we want to check the value in column T, and click OK and repeat for this one. Place that with T and click OK and OK. I'm also going to insert some icons. So on the Insert tab, Icons. If you have Excel 2019 or Onward, you have icons. You do need to be connected to the internet to download the icons. So I'm just going to grab an icon that represents money. We'll go with the coins. And one for the forecast, let's say binoculars. And we'll add those two in. Let's format them in this pale blue color. While they're selected, I'll resize them and we'll drag them up into place. Okay, so that's our headline figures done. I'll grab the slicer from this sheet, Control X to cut, and I'm just going to paste it in there. Now I want the slicer to blend into the background, and if we go to the slicer tab, we have some built-in styles, and this one's in keeping with our colors, but it's still standing out like a sore thumb. So I'm going to right click and duplicate this style and then modify it to suit my needs. So for the whole slicer format, I want the fill to be the same as my background color, and I don't want any border. I'll click OK. I also want to modify the font color on the header just to give it this pale blue color. And OK and OK. Now we just need to apply the format, and now our slicer looks more in keeping with my dashboard. I'm going to right click, go into the slicer settings and change the display header to same month and click OK. Let's take a look at the completed dashboard and see what's next. The first chart is this actual versus plan and forecast. Let's go ahead and build the pivot tables for that one. Back on the Data tab, I'm going to insert a new pivot table. I'm going to put it on the same worksheet. Remember, don't do this at home. Always start a new sheet for each pivot table so you don't get any errors. Now, I want the plan, the forecast, and the actuals. The order of these columns is very important because I want the plan columns to sit behind the forecast and the actual. So keep that in mind, make sure you add them in the correct order. I also want the date in my rows. Let's apply some formatting. This is going to feed through to the chart, so it's just going to save me some work. And obviously I've already set up the custom number format, so I just quickly apply those. Now I can insert the pivot chart. Cluster column is fine. Let's bring it over here and we'll just move the field list over here a little. All right, I'm going to right click, hide all the field buttons on the chart. And then I want to add a chart title. and I want to get rid of grid lines. I'm going to put the legend at the top. It's just going to give my chart some more room, and I can now make the plot area bigger. Okay, with one of the columns selected, I'm going to Control 1 to open the formatting pane. Let me drag it over here so we can work with it closer to the chart. So I want the series overlap to be 100, and I'm going to change the gap width to 30, just makes the columns wider. All right, I'm going to format the color of my plan to this gray, and then the actual, I'm going to have this bright blue color. I'm going to make it 50% transparent, and that's going to allow the plan columns to show through if the actual is higher than plan. And for the forecast, I want no fill. I'm going to give it the same blue border as the actual. Let's make it a bit thicker, but we'll give it a dashed line effect. Before we move it to the dashboard, we'll give it a title, Actual versus Plan and Forecast. And I'll just Control X to cut and Control V to paste it in. Now with it selected, I'm going to hold down Alt and just drag it slightly larger. With the Alt held down, it snaps to the grid behind, so it's easy to resize. Alright, going back to the dashboard, the next chart I need a pivot table for is the cost elements year to date. Let's go ahead and build that pivot table. I'm going to copy this pivot table and paste it below, because this has the same actual plan and forecast figures that I need, except I don't want them by date. These ones I want by cost element group. Now I want the cost element to be included even if there are no costs. So I'm going to right click, go into the field settings, and on the layout and print tab I want to show items with no data. So in the event that there's no plan, forecast or actual, these labels will still appear in the pivot table and they'll feed through to the chart. I also want to show the actuals from largest to smallest, so let's sort them. We're going to give this pivot table a name, Cost Element Bar, which reminds me I didn't give this one a name, so let's go back and fix that. Column chart. And we're ready to insert the pivot chart. Now this is a bar chart. I'll click OK, and let's just bring it over here into view. I'm going to get rid of all these massive field buttons, they just take up way too much room. Let's give the chart a title, and we'll get rid of grid lines, bring the legend to the top, and we'll move that across there to the left. This just gives us more room for the plot area. Now notice that the axis labels are in the reverse order to the pivot table. This is just one of those things that you get with a bar chart. They're all a bit back to front. We'll go in and format it so that the categories are in reverse order, which means now my axis labels are at the top. So let's move them so that they're at the bottom. So we'll set them to high. Now it looks like they're high, but remember this is a bar chart, everything's back to front now. So high makes them at the bottom. Now we also want this one to show the plan, forecast and actuals overlapping. So let's select one of the series and overlap by 100%, make the gap width smaller, and we can go ahead and format each of the series consistent with the other one. So remember the plan is grey, the actual is this bright blue colour but set to 50% transparency, and the forecast is going to be no fill, but we're going to have this blue border, 1.25 and dashed. All right, let's give it a title, cost element year to date, and I'm just going to Control X to cut and Control V to paste it in. Now let's get rid of these task panes, and holding down Alt, I'm just going to snap it to the grid. Okay, let's go and take a look at what the next chart is. IT area year-to-date variances. So we'll go back. I'm just going to insert a new pivot table, but we're going to pop it on that same sheet. Underneath, click OK. So this one is IT area, and I want the plan versus actual variance and the plan versus forecast variance. Let's set up the number formatting. End and enter, and rinse and repeat. And now I just want pivot chart. This is another bar chart. click OK. Let's bring it over here, get rid of those field buttons. We're going to have a chart title. Now I'm going to have labels on these bars, so I don't need my horizontal axis. Let's turn that off, get rid of grid lines, add the labels, and we'll bring the legend to the top. All right, let's just move this over here and that over there. Make this a bit bigger. Now notice that these axis labels are almost overlapping the number labels for the bar. So let's fix that. Control 1 to open the formatting pane. On the labels, I want the position to be low. I also need to set the categories in reverse order. Let's go and make these bars a bit wider, so we'll change the gap width to 30. Let's give the chart a title. IT area year-to-date variances. Now this legend's a bit big. Don't worry about that. I'm going to fix all that at the end. Let's give this pivot table a name so we know what it's for. This is the IT area bar chart. And we'll cut and paste it on the dashboard. Hold down Alt to size it. Okay, let's go back and see what's next. Business area year-to-date variances. This is similar to this chart here. So let's go ahead and all we need to do is copy this one, paste it, and instead of IT area, we want the business area. I'm going to right click and go into the field settings. We're going to set it to show items with no data so they're always present. Let's give this pivot table a name, business area bar, and we'll insert the pivot chart. Remember, it's another bar chart. Let's drag it over here, get rid of those. We'll get rid of the primary horizontal axis. Remember, we're going to give it labels, get rid of the grid lines, put the legend at the top. Move that over there and that over there. All right. So again, with this one, we need to do some formatting of the vertical axis, categories in reverse order, and we want the labels to be low so that they're out of the way. Let's give it a title, business area year-to-date variances, and we'll make these bars a bit wider and then cut and paste onto the dashboard. Get rid of these task panes, holding down Alt. Like I said, don't worry about these overlapping, we'll fix them later. All right, what is next? We've got a bar chart here that shows the plan versus actual variance year to date by country. So let's go and insert that. So we'll insert another pivot table on the existing worksheet underneath the last one. This is our country bar, so we want to see it by country, and then plan versus actual variance. Let's give it some number formatting, and I want to see this sorted, so right click, sort by smallest to largest. I also want to make sure that all countries are always present, so we're going to go down into field settings, and the layout and print, we want show items with no data. Let's insert the pivot chart. This is another bar chart. Bar charts are great when you have long axis labels. That way they're always easy to read. We're going to get rid of the horizontal axis, get rid of grid lines, and we don't need a legend here. We only have one series, and our chart title is going to provide the information about what values are represented in the chart. So this is plan v actual variance year to date. Need to add some data labels, and I want them inside the base. Let's make these bars a bit wider, so we'll give the gap width 30%. I also need to make sure these axis labels are positioned low, because sometimes there's negative variances, as you can see there. And now we're ready to Control X and Control V to paste it in, holding down Alt. Actually, this one should be over here further. Okay. Now I just need to make this label wider for the USA, And let's go back to the dashboard. The last visuals are these sparklines. Notice they're aligned to the vertical axis labels of the charts to the left. And this saves having to duplicate labels for the sparklines. And by color coding the cell fill to match the chart, it makes them appear as though they're part of the chart itself. Okay, let's build the pivot tables for these sparklines. On the Analysis tab, I need one for this data, so I'm just going to copy this pivot table and paste. Instead of having plan and forecast, we just need actual, and we need to see it broken down by the date. Let's get rid of the grand total, so I'm just going to remove that. And that's the data for our sparklines. So let's go and insert them. I'm just going to select the cells, insert. This one's a column sparkline. The data range, that's our pivot table here. So I'm going to select them, and I'm selecting right through to December. That way I don't need to update these sparklines when I add my new data. Click OK. Can't really see them because they're a bit similar to the background color. So I'm going to color them this bright blue, which is in keeping with the color for the actual. We'll give it a heading. And let's go back to the pivot table. Let's give this one a name. So this is my cost element sparkline. So I'll copy this pivot table. Can't quite see it. Make sure I've got it all. Copy, and we'll paste it in here. Now again, we don't want the forecast, we just want to see the actual, and we want it broken down by date. I'm going to get rid of the grand total. Now this, I want to see the cumulative variance. So I'm going to right click, show values as, running total in, and here we want to see it by date. Click OK. Now we have the cumulative variance. So I'm ready to insert my sparklines, select the cells, insert. This one we're going to do as a line sparkline. The data range is my pivot table, right through to December. Click OK. Let's give the sparkline a color. I'm going to go with the same color as plan versus actual variance. That's this one here. Let's give it a heading, cumulative plan versus actual. Now notice that this variance starts to go up, and that's because it's including the period September through to December, which we don't have actuals for yet. So what we need to do is link this slicer to the pivot table that's feeding these sparklines. In fact, we need to link this slicer to multiple pivot tables. Let me go back here and just check. I don't think I've given this one a name yet. No, I haven't. So let's do that first so we know which pivot table's which. This one's business area sparkline. And we'll go back to the dashboard, right click the slicer, report connections. Now I can choose which pivot tables and therefore pivot charts should be filtered by this slicer. So I want the business area bar and the sparkline. I don't want the column chart because I want all of the months always present in the chart, so I don't ever want to filter that one. I do want to filter the cost element bar and the sparkline and the country bar chart. I don't want the headline full year filtered because I want it to always show the full year forecast, so we're going to skip that one, but I do want the IT area bar chart filtered. So click OK, and you can see now my sparkline is truncated to only show up to September. So while we're on the topic of slicers, let's insert the other two. So with any of the pivot charts selected, I'm going to go on the Insert tab, Slicer. I want Region and IT Area. Click OK. Let's bring them over here. Drag this one up above. Let's resize them while they're both selected. Let's apply our custom slicer format. We'll make the buttons a bit bigger, and then let's just resize them so we can see both. Okay, I won't waste too much time on the slicer formatting. Something's gone wrong with this one. Let's give the axis labels a bit more room. And this one here. Okay, while we're doing a little bit of formatting, let's fix all of these legends so they're not so big. One of the problems is they all contain sum of before the item that they represent. So we can get rid of that sum of text. Go back into the analysis. Remember, the pivot table is feeding the pivot charts. So I'm just going to select all of the cells containing these pivot tables. I don't want to change the headline ones. So I'm just going to Control H for find and replace. What do I want to find? Sum of and the space. And what do I want to replace it with? Well, I need to replace it with a space because I can't have any of these fields with the same name as a field in the field list of the pivot table. So putting a space in there just tricks Excel into thinking that it's unique. So we'll replace all. And if we go back now to the dashboard, you can see all of the legends require a lot less room. So we'll just resize them so that they're out of the way. And this font here needs to be smaller. So the last thing to do is to fix the formatting. Now I'll select the first chart. What I want to do is make the fill color a slightly lighter shade of the green background, and I don't want any outline. So I'm going to repeat that for each chart, and then we'll come back and fix the font. So F4 to repeat the outline, and then let's do the shape fill. F4 for the shape fill, and let's do the outline. F4 for the outline, and then shape fill. And last one. All right, with that one selected, I'm just going to set the font color to this pale blue, and F4 to repeat, F4, F4, and F4. So that's quite quick to set all the formatting up in one go. What I want to do is make these sparklines appear to be part of this chart. So let's change this fill color to this blue as well, and this one. So now the sparkline and the bar charts appear to be one chart. What I didn't do is link all of the slices to the relevant pivot tables. So let's do that quickly. This is the IT area. So I want the cost element bar, sparkline, the country bar, the headline, and the headline year to date. I don't want the IT area bar to be filtered by this IT area slicer because there's no point. It's already broken out. If I filter it, it's just going to end up with one item showing in the chart. So better to leave them all broken out. Then we can compare them in context to one another. Likewise with the business areas, they're actually very closely aligned to the IT areas. So I'm not going to filter them with this slicer either. I'll click OK. Let's do the same for region, report connections. This one's easy. It's going to filter all of them. We'll just select them all, click OK. Now, when I select some IT areas, you can see the relevant charts update. Likewise for the regions, you can see our conditional formatting's being applied and everything's updating, allowing us to filter and focus on specific areas of our business. Now that our dashboard is all set up, let's simulate what happens when next month comes along and we get the new actuals for September. So on the Future Data tab, I've got the data here for September through to December. I'm just going to right click, filter, and I'm just going to filter for September. And then I can copy that data on this sheet that contains the source data for all of my charts and pivot tables. On the very next row of the table, I'm going to paste in the September data, and you'll see the table will grow. And you'll see that this pull handle down here in the bottom right of the table will now be at the new bottom. We can see now our rows go up to 84,600, and there's the end of our table. So I haven't had to update any ranges. And if we go back to the dashboard, I'm just going to select up to September. And then when I refresh, keep an eye on this column here in the actual versus plan and forecast chart. To refresh the dashboard, all I do is go to the Data tab and click Refresh All. You can see in the blink of an eye, my dashboard is completely updated. And that's it. I don't need to edit any formulas or update any of the charts. And the reason the dashboard is easy to update is because I formatted the data in an Excel table. Remember, it's called data. And then when I built my pivot tables, they referenced that data. You can see there. So any new data that's added to that table is automatically picked up by the pivot tables when I click refresh. And because I used pivot charts, they automatically include all of the data in the pivot table. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you'd like to get up to speed quickly with dashboards, please consider my course. In the meantime, you can download the Excel file for this lesson from the link here. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more. And why not share it with your friends who might also find it useful. Thanks for watching.